When I was small, my mum bought me a book called Five Little Peppers and How They Grew. Obviously, this is a reprint. And I really liked the book. She read it aloud to me. And I actually admit that I ended up calling her Mamsie after a point because, you know, the children in this book called their mother Mamsie. And when she was reading it aloud to me, I asked her, what's a Mamsie? And she said, it's a mother. It's what I am. Right, that makes her Mamsie. Anyway, the book was very, very delightful. I really liked it. I mean, it was sweet, it was sentimental, but you know, it's basically about a family of children and their mother called Pepper, the Pepper family. Mrs. Pepper is a single mother who is struggling to raise her children and make both ends meet after the untimely death of her husband when her youngest of 5 children was just a baby. And the eldest 2 children, Polly and Ben, are wonderful young people. They're 11, Ben is 11 and Polly is 10 in this book. And Francie, the youngest child, is 3 years old. So you fall in love with the family. They're very sunny people. At the same time, they're not pious goody two-shoes. They have their naughty moments, particularly some of them are slightly naughtier than the others. And suddenly, something changes for these people and they're rescued, as it were. They end up having a much better life because of a well-deserved better life because of their rescue, as it were, or because they've met another family whom they've helped. So these children meet a young lad named Jasper Elliot King, wealthy family, whose father, Mr. King, is promptly adopted by these children, called Grandpapa King, Jasper's father. And Jasper is considered the elder brother they didn't have, and Jasper considers them all his siblings. And it is these kings who rescue the Peppers from Badgertown, from their little brown house, from their penury, and take them to live in the city where they are provided with an education, music lessons, whatever it takes. And as if this rescue, it wasn't enough, it turns out that Jasper's sister, that is Mr. King's daughter, Mrs. Whitney, is the wife of Mason Whitney. Mason Whitney happens to be Mrs. Pepper's cousin. So Mrs. Pepper's cousin's wife is the sister of Jasper King, or is the daughter of Mr. King, who adopts the Peppers. So everybody is a cousin. Despite their new luxurious lifestyle, the Peppers remain very humble, very down to earth, fully aware that they will work for a living. Polly Pepper wants to become a music teacher, becomes a music teacher, gives music lessons for a living. Ben Pepper goes to work. So Joel Pepper eventually becomes a pastor. So they know they're going to work for their living. They're not going to, you know, rest back and live off the kings, as it were. They are always aware of their good fortune. They're always compassionate towards other people. They're always incredibly helpful. And when they find other people in need of help, they're willing to give it. So I read this book, I fell in love with it, grew up, forgot all about it. And then some years later, I was at the North Pacific Antiquarian Book Fair in Seattle, 1 October, and I came across some of these. And I said, wait, she wrote more. She wrote other books. And the man at the bookstore said, yes, Margaret Sidney has written other books. There are non-Pepper books as well, but Five Little Peppers, there are 12 books in all. Who knew? Obviously, I wanted to read more about the Peppers and bought as many of them as I could find. Whatever I couldn't find are on Project Gutenberg because, you know, they're well past the copyright date. I will link all that in the description box below so you can read the lot. And having read the lot, I'll tell you my thoughts on these books and their author. Who is Margaret Sidney? There is no Margaret Sidney. It is a pseudonym. Margaret Sidney is a pseudonym of Harriet Lothrop. He was born in 1844 and died in 1924. She was the daughter of a New Haven architect called Sidney Mason Stone, thereby the pseudonym Margaret Sidney. Mason is a character who features in these books as well. And she married Daniel Lothrop, who owned a publishing house. He died in 1892 when their daughter was just 9 years old. When she was 34 years old, Margaret Harriet Lothrop started sending short stories to a magazine called Wide Awake. I'm going to be hunting up that magazine soon. And they featured the same characters, the same Pepper family. And there was more and more demand. So from 1881 to 1960, across 35 years, Margaret Sidney, Harriet Lothrop, wrote 12 books about the Peppers. Now, the first book was the only one that she'd actually intended to write, but people kept writing in and asking for more and more from the Peppers or about the Peppers, so she kept writing more and more. We'll talk about what happened as a result in a minute. Now, Harriet and Daniel, who owned a publishing house and had a daughter, Margaret Sidney, mind you, Margaret, when she was 40 years old. Unfortunately, Daniel Lothrop died in 1892 when their daughter was just 9 years old. Now, Harriet Lothrop and Daniel Lothrop bought the Wayside, which is the house where Louisa May Alcott lived at the time, as did Nathaniel Hawthorne. She also had interest in other real estate, where famous authors had lived at some point or the other, and I am getting urticaria, which means that I'm allergic to something or the other around. Anyway, so she wrote more than 30 books that were not about the Peppers, just 12 about the Peppers. But the non-Pepper books are for another video. Today we're going to do only the 5 Little Peppers series. So the 5 Little Peppers live in the little brown house in Badgertown, and their main aim is to help Mamsie, their mother, who is a hard-working and compassionate, righteous but not, preachy mother. She struggles to, as I told you, to make both ends meet. So although the children have a lot of dreams, about their ships coming in, they're very contented people as a rule, and they're very, very, very loyal to each other. And they seek enjoyment out of simple pleasures. These are children who, during this book, have no idea what Christmas is. They've never had a Christmas in their lives. So they get a tree and decorate it with corn, and they find pleasure in that. An old leather boot is a much loved treasure. So they find their pleasure in simple things, and that old world charm is there, And then these children move to the city, and after that you only see the little brown house or Badgertown and the characters there only once in a while, and the little brown house becomes idealized during the series. So I'll tell you, I've just told you about the first book, 5 Little Peppers, and how they grew. I'll just tell you about the sequels. Now, although there are 12 sequels, only 6 of these are sort of in order, as it were. How they grew, obviously, the first book. 5 Little Peppers Midway, the second book. 5 Little Peppers Abroad, the third book. 5 Little Peppers and Their Friends, the fourth book. 5 Little Peppers Grown Up, the fifth book. Phronsie Pepper, the sixth book. So basically, the series follows Phronsie from age 3 to age 20 when she's grown up and gets married. Fronsie's name is Sophronia. Again, very much in keeping with the names used during those days. Other books, the stories Polly Pepper told, The Adventures of Joel Pepper, Ben Pepper, 5 Little Peppers in the Little Brown House, R. Davy Pepper. These are books that provide, that are fillers, that provide prequels sometimes, that provide some background, that happen somewhere in between these others. But these are the 6 that you need to read to find out the story. 5 Little Peppers and How They Grew was a typical Victorian book with the same kind of morals, the same kind of values that were uplifted, that were put forward, that were highlighted. At the same time, I think it tried to do so without being too preachy, and the ages of the characters, 3 to 11, explained their behavior, how they reacted to situations, what they did, how they found enjoyment, their interests were sort of in line with their ages. And there was none of that racial stereotyping or prejudice or, certain attitudes that were associated with that era. In this book, that changes with 5 Little Peppers Midway. The beginning of 5 Little Peppers Midway. It's clean, miss, he added with pardonable pride, but it's awful black. Awful black, excuse me. When I came across this, that is the first sequel to And How They Grew, I was very, very put off by this opening. Awful black. No. I just want to tell it like it is, but awful black, don't use the adjective for the love of Pete. Midway becomes better. What happens is that they return to the Little Brown House, which by then is idealized as the seat of all enjoyment and all that's true and holy and good and righteous and splendiferous and every other adjective that is positive that you can possibly think of on this good earth. There is also the marriage of Mrs. Pepper to Dr. Fisher. Eventually they have a baby whom they call King. and that is baby Kingfisher, don't ask. So that's Five Little Peppers midway, and the opening completely put me off, because from then you see those racial stereotypes that you find in a lot of books of that era, racial stereotyping. Five Little Peppers Abroad is another book that I actually quite enjoyed reading. All five don't go abroad. I don't know why it was called Five Little Peppers Abroad. Only Polly Pepper and Phronsie Pepper go abroad with their mother. So it's basically two little peppers abroad. So as you can tell, this is about traveling, and I quite liked, seeing other places through a book. I love reading books on travel. And this was very, very, very thorough in terms of describing places. However, there was the same sexist attitude, the same chauvinist attitude that was prevalent at the time. Look at this. They visited the Netherlands, mind you. Dear me, the Brooke women have something to do, don't they, to keep everything so shiny and clean, asks Jasper King. So, it's a woman's duty to keep everything shiny and clean, is it? The woman's duty to clean, not the man's. Sexist attitude of the time, prevalent in Five Little Peppers Abroad. The other thing is, Phronsie is now 8 years old and she's still having massive crying fits at the drop of a hat, cries for every single thing. However, this, along with the first book, is my joint favourite, simply because of the loads of detailed travel descriptions. They are dated, obviously. I mean, Europe today doesn't have a lot of the things that were described in this book, and a lot of things that are in Europe today weren't described in this book. But I quite enjoyed the characterization of some of the new people who appeared there. Tom Selwyn, Mrs. Selwyn, Arthur Selwyn, the Earl of Cavendish, Fanny Vanderburg, and Adela Gray. So new characters are coming in, and I quite like their characterization. I would have liked to see these characters make an appearance in further sequels. But let me tell you, the characters that you see, the new characters that you see in Five Little Peppers Abroad, you won't see again. This is it. They're not going to come after this book, which is a huge pity, because there was a lot of scope here. And I also felt that Mr. King was a bit hypocritical, because he disciplines Adela Gray for wanting to sit with Polly, but not any of his own brood for wanting to sit with Polly. Polly Pepper is now becoming universally popular, to an extent where you wonder what people see in her to want to be around her every bloody minute of the time. But, as I told you, lots of travel in this book, lots of adventures in this book, things keep happening. I quite like this book. Now we come to Five Little Peppers and their friends, and this is where the series begins to lose the plot. This is the problem when, you keep on writing books because you request it, because the public wants it, not because, I think the book has to come from within, not because people are asking you to write the book. So that is the frontispiece of Five Little Peppers and their friends. And I quite liked the opening of this book, actually. The opening features Phronsie, who's playing with her dolls, and she gets kidnapped by another little girl who is abused in her home by some woman who calls herself the girl's gran. So Phronsie rescues this child, who is called Rachel, and who is sent to live with the Hendersons, Parson and Mrs. Henderson, whom we first met in How They Grew, in Badgertown. I would have liked to see even more of Rachel. Sadly, we don't see much of Rachel after that. I mean, beyond a point. The other thing is, Phronsie still has major crying fits. Phronsie at this gave a loud sob. Take me, Polly. So Polly sat down on the floor, and Phronsie snuggled up closer into her neck and was rocked back and forth to her heart's content. And Joel Pepper is the second boy after Ben. He's younger than Polly by, I think, 2 years or so. He's quite obstinate and still takes massive crying fits when he doesn't have his way, and then he regrets it afterwards. Oh, my bag, cried Phronsie in a wail of distress, leaning forward suddenly. My bag! Phronsie looked back, and the tears racing over her round cheeks. Yes, there is, contradicted Phronsie, her lip quivering. Despite all her efforts, the tears began to course down her cheeks. She's my little girl, and I like her. So, I feel that by now, character development has dried up, and the author isn't able to move past the ages of the characters when she first conceived them in How They Grew. So Phronsie, for all intents and purposes, remains 3 years old with her crying fits. And look at Joel. He's still as adamant and used to getting his own way as he was in Five Little Peppers. And while that was fine in a boy that age, now he's growing up. So Joel, thanks to his obstinacy, ends up losing $10 that he raised for charity, and then he tries to earn it back by working for Mr. King in his library. And he has even more massive tantrums than he did in How They Grew. In How They Grew, he was a little boy. He didn't take to tantrums, mind you. He did want his own way and want the best of everything, want all the peppermints that Grandma Bascom gave him, want all the butter and all the candy and all the good things to eat. But now he's throwing huge tantrums. Joel's face worked and he flung the broken racket across the room. It fell with a crash. He ran over to the bed, popped into the middle of it, and buried his face in his brown hands, his shoulders in distress. "Go away!" he screamed, kicking as hard as he could. And a couple of pages later, "Go away!" screamed Joel, kicking lustily. "Oh dear me, Mamsie, Mamsie!" he blubbered, rolling from side to side on the neat white bed. Blubbered, rolling from side to side. That is not what your teenagers do. Your teenagers slam doors, throw things, call you all sorts of names, tell you you're ruining their lives, and tell you they hate you, but they're not going to blubber rolling from side to side on a clean white bed or scream, "Mamsie, Mamsie!" Not when they're teenagers. When they're teenagers, they probably tell their Mamsie that they ruined their lives, not, screaming for Mamsie. It gets worse in Five Little Peppers Grown Up. Much, much, much worse. Mrs. Pepper has a baby. The baby is born in this book. That is Kingfisher. These children used to deal with every crisis when the stuff did not function in this book. And by this book, they're unable to deal with crises. They fuss over every single thing. So Francie here forgets a basket of dolls that she's carrying to a children's home. "I'll go back after it," says Joel. "But you can't," said Francie. "The train will come and you won't be here." "I'll take the next train," said Joel, swallowing hard. "I'll bring the box all right." "Oh, Joel, Joel," said Francie, running after him. "Don't go," she implored. "What's the matter?" cried Mr. King, forgetting in his indignation to hurry after her. "Francie, wait, what is it, dear?" "Joel's gone," panted Francie. "Do stop him, Grandpapa dear. I'd not take the dolls at all than have Joel left." "Stop him? I can't. Bless me. Somebody, where are you all?" Polly comes up running after this with a pale face. "Oh, Grandpapa," she begins at the sight of him. "Joel's gone home," announced Francie, clasping her hands in distress. "After the box of dolls and—" "Joel's gone home," echoed Polly, standing still. "Yes, Polly. Do stop him and bring him back." "You forget a box of dolls. Your brother runs home, who is a teenager, runs home after them." What's the big deal? Five Little Peppers Grown Up is where Francie, the author, begins to provide Francie with some unexpected maturity. A little girl named Helen dies, and Francie says she needs time to think it over, and she's very careful there, very reflective there, and sort of, pensive. And I feel that this is a turning point for Francie, and she begins to mature slowly but surely after this. But the compassion is always there in her. She inherits a sum of money from Mr. King's cousin Eunice, that is Mrs. Chatterton, and she uses that money to found a home, a children's home, Dunraven Children's Home, where she not only provides little children with a safe home, little orphans with a safe home, but also goes out of her way to provide them with enjoyment, including Christmas and presents and dolls and things like that. And Joel is beginning to mature here as well. He is in college now, and he is called Deacon Pepper because he's very active in church works at college. However, the other problem with Grown Up is that Polly's popularity continues to grow by leaps and bounds, and everybody and their brother and their neighbor and their cousin and their father and their son and their uncle wants to marry Polly. Everybody wants to marry Polly. There isn't anybody, I think, apart from Grandpapa King and Dr. Fisher and Mr. Whitney, who's their uncle, who wants to marry Polly. The thing is, the person whom she ends up marrying is somebody whom she had declared to be her brother, who had declared that she was his sister. The person she ends up marrying is her own auntie's brother. Would you marry your aunt's brother, people? I mean, your uncle's wife is your aunt, right? Would you marry your uncle's wife's brother? I wouldn't. Ew! She marries her uncle's wife's brother. And while he tells her of his own volition in front of her mother that he loves her, it is her mother that actually does the proposing. Will you become his wife? Is asked by Polly's mother. Would you marry a man if your mother told you in front of him to become his wife? I'd run for the hills. I'd freak out. I don't know. I'd go completely insane. Maybe this is where the book becomes very, very, very dated and very Victorian. I mean, there are other books written at around the same time. Victorian and post-Victorian. I mean, the books were written until 1916, right? So that's Georgian, Edwardian, Georgian. And during the Edwardian era, because Edward VII died in 1909. So there were plenty of other books written at the same time, at around the same time. Gilbert Blythe proposed by himself. All the men in Little Women proposed by themselves. Even Pollyanna's Jimmy proposed by himself. Mr. Pendleton and Daddy Longlegs proposed by himself. So other coming-of-age books, the men all proposed by themselves. They didn't go and, ask their future bride's mother to ask the bride-to-be if she would consent to become their wife. The other thing is, after the first book, Ben and Polly, being the first two of the Pepper siblings, were incredibly close. That closeness sort of ebbs away and is kind of lost. You don't see it at all in the later books. Ben actually gets very little page time, kind of like screen time. Very little page time at all in the later books. And you see very little of Davy as well. And you find out there's just one reference telling you that Davy, little David Pepper, has become a bit of a dandy in his late adolescence. And he is nicknamed Davina by other students while at college. So there, Davina, making Davina out of Davy, I think is Margaret Sidney or Harriet Lothrop well ahead of her time, Is that, somebody who is a transgender, that's very, very, or somebody who's gender fluid, very, very ahead of her time. But, the rest of it is extremely dated, I'm afraid. Anyway, Polly gets engaged to Jasper, finally. And then in the last book, Phronsie Pepper, hang on, find it somewhere. Yeah, that's the one. Phronsie Pepper. That is the last book in the series. I'm not talking about publishing date. I'm talking about the order in which they must be read. This is where Phronsie is grown up, aged 20, has a beau. Meanwhile, Jasper and Polly have had two children called Elliot, Jasper Elliot King Elliot, and Barbie, Barbara, named for Jasper's mother. The children get lost trying to get to Mrs. Beebe's house. This sort of echoes Phronsie getting lost in book 1, when she followed that monkey and organ grinder. And this is the book where Phronsie falls in love. Her beau's name is Rosalind May. Despite being 20, she still sits on her grandpapa's lap, but he won't accept that she's grown up and is in love. So they parted, and Rosalind May gets what is called low fever. And Phronsie has to go to him because the worst is feared. And we also find that Joel is lost at sea, and he's found later, obviously. Ben is in love with Charlotte Chatterton. Charlotte Chatterton is another niece of cousin Eunice Chatterton, whom we met in Five Little Peppers. Midway, she left all her money to Phronsie, who started a children's hymn, but gave some of the money to Charlotte Chatterton, who's become a singer. And Ben is in love with her, so Ben is settled as well. Joel is now a pastor in Phronsie Pepper. There's also a dramatic fire in the little brown house, so that happens as well. There are some major discrepancies, possibly because she wasn't writing these in order. She was writing these on demand because the public kept clamoring for more and more books. So because of that, there are some discrepancies. And one of them is that Jasper says Joel was a huge nuisance while making a cake for Mamsie, when they were trying to get wedding cake recipe from Grandma Bascom. The thing is, that episode happened in book 1 before the children met Jasper, before Jasper King was in the picture at all. So what is he doing, going about, pretending he was there? So these are discrepancies that happen because the author, wrote these books all, mixed up, not in the right order. Now, while Joel Pepper did not have too much importance compared to the other Peppers in the first book, Five Little Peppers and How They Grew. His character, unfortunately, does not improve in the subsequent books. In fact, it deteriorates horribly. I'm not expecting a little Lord Fauntleroy here. I mean, his younger brother, David, is practically little Lord Fauntleroy there. I'm perfectly happy with a Colin Craven, a spoiled, tantrum-throwing brat. But there was massive character development there. In Joel's case, all you see is that he gets worse and worse and worse, picks fights while at college, threatens to beat up Polly, finally ends up becoming a minister when he's 9 years old, gets a slice of cake. Everybody gets a slice of cake. And David's cake, he's slower at eating his cake, and Joel finishes his cake first. "You had a bigger piece than mine," says Joel. "No, I didn't," said David. "They were just alike." "Well, it's bigger now," said Joel. "Anyway, it's bigger. There, I'm done, and you ought to give me a bite of yours." Little David gave a sigh. "Well, you may have just one," he said slowly. "I don't know what Mrs. Pepper was doing. I don't know what Polly Pepper was doing, or Ben. Nobody disciplined this chap at all, or told him not to be this selfish. And Polly does scold Joel when she finds out and gives David a bit of her cake. But the injustice, it rankles, because, there are younger children in that same family. David and Phronsie were far, not this selfish and tantrum-throwing. Polly comes home with a bundle of shopping that she's done for her mother. "Take care, Joe, or you'll spill it again." "Spill it again," said Joel. "I haven't spilled any bundle, Polly Pepper. Let me see what's in it." He tried to get hold of one end that stuck out. Polly tells Joel, "Stop it," she commanded sharply. "You've been a bad, wicked boy, and you're going to tear this bundle all to pieces." "I haven't been a bad, wicked boy," contradicted Joel in a loud, vehement tone, and stamping with his bare heel in the dust that flew up in their faces in a little cloud. "So there now, Polly Pepper. He never improves. He never does. Polly's made these wings for a little play, where Joel insists on being a bear, won't listen to reason. No other child does that. And he grabs the wings, breaks them. "I didn't mean to, and now it won't fly. Fly," screamed Joel in a gust. And Mrs. Pepper bakes a cake for Polly for putting together the play. "Now, children, all of you sit down, and Polly shall cut it, for she made the play." She handed Polly the big knife. Let me, screamed Joel, with no eyes for anything but the sharp knife. "I've never cut a cake." "Mammy, let me." "Neither has Polly," said Mrs. Pepper quietly. "No, Joe, Polly made the cake, or else any of you couldn't have had this nice time. And she's worked herself most to death to get us through it," said Ben. Polly had seized the big knife and taken one step toward the wonderful cake. Now she stopped and looked over at Joel. "You may," she said, smiling brightly. "I think everybody indulges this child a great deal. I mean, he's somebody who shoots first and regrets later. A very impulsive character. He also bullies David completely. He actually bullies his younger brother. David talks about which horse he likes the best. "I like Jerry the best." "I do," said little David. "No, you don't," screamed Joel, with a nudge to David's side. "Bill's the best. Say so, Dave. Say so." "I can't," said little David, "because I think just as Mr. Tispet does. We're talking about a little boy's liking for a particular horse, and his elder brother doesn't like that. And Joel makes David act as a lot of animals because he's putting together a circus. And David, his throat is sore, his face is red, he's tired to death, and he lets out all the chickens in Parson Henderson's house. He's a very unthinking character, and he doesn't improve with the books over time. There is very little character development there. He ends up setting the little brown house on fire. Can anything be worse than that? He sets his house on fire, and suddenly all you hear, he's getting into fights at college, and then he's called Deacon Pepper because he's very active in the church group, and next thing you know, he's becoming a pastor. I mean, there's Ella Montgomery's Davy, Dora and Davy Keith, the twins that are adopted by Marilla. And Davy Keith is naughty, even tells lies. Over time, his character development is completely different from Joel Pepper's character development. In the sequels, David becomes quite responsible, takes over the farm, marries, has children, and runs Green Gables. On the other hand, Joel Pepper's character deteriorates, particularly over the sequels. He becomes more and more selfish and bullying, tantrum-throwing, impulsive, hot-tempered, impetuous, and then finally ends up as a pastor out of nowhere. So yeah, I feel that, I mean, I'm not just comparing and contrasting for the sake of it, I'm just saying that other naughty lads in fiction have had character development over sequels, have improved over sequels. This one over sequels is deteriorated badly. So while I loved book 1, didn't mind book 2, quite liked book 3, the rest, when the children grow up and, get settled, I feel that there are far superior coming-of-age books out there. The Little House on the Prairie series. Laura Wilder and Alonzo Wilder are a lovely couple. I love that series. Anne and Gilbert Blythe. Rilla of Ingleside, she comes of age in the last one. Jo March, Little Women, her coming of age. An old-fashioned girl, also Louisa May Alcott. Polly comes of age and gets married. I feel that there are better coming-of-age books than the latter Five Little Peppers books. But the first Five Little Pepper book, the first, or the original, How They Grew, is lovely, is a great read. The others, not so much, particularly not after Five Little Peppers Abroad. I feel that she should have stopped after Five Little Peppers Abroad and, not caved into the pressure. I think one of the problems is that I read this one as a child and all of the others as an adult. And that, when you read something as a child, you see it with a different pair of eyes than you do when you're reading something as an adult. That's a different pair of eyes altogether. I think character development did suffer a bit around the middle of these books because she had to keep writing based on public demand. Sometimes you feel that, 13-year-olds are still behaving like 3-year-olds and so on. That is one of the problems. Then there are some stereotypes, some sexist stereotypes as well, some attitudes that were very typical of the age. They are very, very sentimental books, extremely sentimental language used. Obviously, that is only to be expected, not finding fault here. Typical Victorian Edwardian Georgian books. So have you read Margaret Sidney's books? Have you read Five Little Peppers and How They Grew? Have you heard about this book? Which is your favorite American coming-of-age book of the time? Do tell me all of that in the comments below. So that's all from me for today. Thank you for watching this video. Please do give me a thumbs up. Please do hit the subscribe button. Please do ring the notifications bell, and I'll speak to you soon.